Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to Heartbeat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Heartbeat on this beautiful, sunny Seattle evening, Wednesday evening here. Thank you for joining us. We have a great show planned for you this evening. Before we start, there's just a couple things I wanted to say to our audience. First off, on behalf of Converge Media, we wanted to send our warm condolences to the Buchanan family here in the Seattle area. JoJo Buchanan is a well-known person in our community out of O'Dea High School. And so our thoughts and prayers are with the Buchanan family in this time. Our show this evening is scheduled to talk. We have a great guest on with us tonight, with me tonight. I'm going to welcome him in, and then I want to start off just by talking about what's going on in the national news today. So let me introduce him with you. He's a colleague of mine, or a former colleague of mine. He is the host of Seattle Here and Now. He's also the host of What's Cooking in Columbia City. Let's welcome John Yasutake in here from Rainier Avenue Radio. John, welcome on to Heartbeat here at Converge.
Well, thank you. I am so honored. Little old me, well, not little old me, but all me. Well, thank you very much. I've been, like I said, following you. I've had a chance to see your show as well as be on it.
Yes.
And now you're in a new, as they say, a new venue, which is even great. And I appreciate the invite. Thank you very much.
Well, you have tentacles in the Seattle area. You have a lot going on here. We're going to talk about, you have been, God, I looked at your bio, so 40 something years. You are definitely an activist. You are definitely involved in a lot of equity work and civil rights work. And I just want to unpack a lot of the things that you're involved in. Before we do that, I wanted to make sure we talked about what's on the hearts and minds of most people across this country today, which is yet another episode of gun violence, of shootings. And I wrestled with what to even say at this point, because I think the numbers were like, 136 shootings now in less than 90 days of 2023. So definitely on target for the largest. And, you can look across all the social media and the national news outlets, and it's as if we're paralyzed and no one knows what to do about this. What thoughts do you have about what is happening nationally with gun violence? Keeping in mind, we've had our own here in Seattle, and recently, I think our last one in the Seattle area was in the November timeline. So we're not immune from it here, and no families. What thoughts do you have about?
Well, it's obvious. The whole issue of gun control, it has to be at the top of the list. By that, I mean, for people who have lawful means and who are lawfully owners of guns, that's not the issue. The right to own, keep and bear arms, etc., the Constitution, all of that. But the availability of firearms, whether it be long guns, rifles, shotguns, and or pistols, it's just incredible. I think I read a few years, well, not even a few years ago, that in the United States, the average family has 2.3 children, but has 4.5 or 5.6 guns. So everybody in the family can have at least one gun or one firearm. And I work with a young man, and there's a group called Responsible Gun Ownership. And what we're finding out is how people are getting a hold of these weapons. They're initially done legally, lawfully, but somehow they get into the hands of these individuals who do what they do. And I mean, it's going to continue. I don't, I don't see it abating in any way, shape, or form.
Let's, I follow the debate online about, is it the guns or is it the people who are using the guns? There's an argument on both sides of the
Oh,
equation, and it's probably some of both.
hmm.
Let's talk about what creates a mass shooter for a second. And I actually wanted to show this article that I was digging into today to look at the study. There's a recent study that's been done about this. Can we show that? For a second here, this article that,
Mm.
and the study talks about, they interviewed 180 people who are families members who are who have been impacted by this gun violence, and they're talking about things about mental health and so
Hmm.
forth. And some of the things that they're saying is that I guess the basic foundation or finding that they had in this study is that this is the result of people who come from early childhood trauma. And
Mm.
so it talked a lot about violence in the home, sexual assault, parental abuse.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts about that whole?
Well, certainly, that's probably going to need a greater body of research on that, because violence is not natural. It's not an organic thing. It's something that's learned and something that's taught, and somebody learns it. Uh, and so, somewhere in the continuum of raising a child, there's got to be that issue of dealing with that person's inability. Anger is part of it too. The inability to manage your anger. I mean, we all get angry, but how we manage it,
Yeah, when I was reading this today, the things that were going through me as I read it is, when we look at who predominantly are doing these mass shootings across this country, is predominantly
right.
young white men. In this particular Nashville shooting, it's a young white woman, I believe, who's transitioning to a man. And I wonder, when I read it, when you think of the findings in the study around abuse and trauma, I mean, that is what is done to brown and black communities
Yeah.
every single day. We live in that kind of trauma and are raised around violence and all the things because there's violence against our communities. So what is triggering? I mean, we all have a right to be angry given the violence that goes on against us. And it is not us that are doing the mass shootings. So I guess I just don't know how to reconcile it. I mean, I have just wrestled with, we can land on this data to say that this is what's triggering it or causing it. But to follow that logic means that the communities that have the violence done against them should arguably be the ones that are committing the violence and are not.
Mhm.
And so I just don't know that anybody talks about that. I mean, I'm just talking about it because every single day we're waking up holding our breath wondering what has
Yeah.
happened and is something going to happen again. So I just was curious what your thoughts are, and even for our community, as you listen to this, I will be fascinated to hear. I mean, you can comment on our feed. What do you think we should do? There's I'm also working on a story, so to be forthcoming about, whether it makes sense to have student resource officers in schools because those are armed police officers. How do we protect our
Mhm.
kids? Who's the ones that are being disciplined the most? And if we put police officers in the school, who are the kids that are going to get harmed? Like, it's a very um, dicey issue. And so I just wanted to give it a little bit of conversation today because I think it's important that every community be talking about this issue and trying to figure out ways that we can mitigate this happening.
Well, no, that's a very good point. I was talking to some people, and they mentioned the 1619 project,
Mhm.
and they were talking about the trauma of slavery and how that imparts a trauma intergenerationally,
Hmm.
and we know what the degradations and the violence perpetrated on people of African descent in this North American variant of slavery. So that, to me, has a legitimacy in terms of the fact that these are behaviors that are, I guess you could say, ingrained in us because of the history of what's going on. But the fact that it's singularly one group of individuals by race and by gender, white,
Mostly, not exclusively,
not
but
exclusive,
mostly,
but
yeah,
mostly white
yeah.
males.
Hmm.
There's an issue that that I've heard talk about. Again, violence is learned behavior. What kind of circumstance uh, dictated their behavior through their childhood and the learning process? And when they were identified as having issues, were we able to um, do something about it? Remediate it and help that individual. And the thing that bothers me is that in almost all these incidents, they said there have been red flags that showed
Hmm.
that there were times along that, again, that timeline continuum, there were red flags coming up
Hmm.
in almost every
And
case. Yeah.
that's right. And there was parental cooperation. So if you think about what was his name, Kyle Rittenhouse, and
Yeah.
the parents. In fact, there's litigation going on now, or there's a case with the Michigan shootings that are being brought against the parents. And
Mhm.
so there's this whole debate about whether, I mean, do we start addressing this issue by starting to
Yeah.
prosecute parents for it?
Right.
Because are they negligent in the red flags that are being seen?
Yeah.
Are they participating in buying the guns?
Yeah.
As in Kyle Rittenhouse, the mom drove him to the site to do the
Yeah.
shootings. Should these parents be held accountable? And if we start to hold the families accountable, is that right, fair? I mean, I don't have an answer for it. It's fascinating because we can't seem to get Congress to pass any gun control laws. And
They get funding from
right,
organizations like the NRA, National Rifle Association, as well as other groups, and those constitutional pundits that say, "Oh, you can take away my right." Well, again, the thing is, you have a right to keep and bear arms. Okay, that was written for the Constitution way back when you had to have a militia to protect this country. You didn't have a standing army. That's 300-400 years ago. Now, let's be real. The issue of owning again a gun, if it's legally owned, fine. The other aspect is, and oftentimes, and the statistic is very, very prevalent, if a gun is in the home and it gets used, 75 to 80% of the time, it gets used against a family member. Again, that issue of access.
mhm,
I had, when my past employment, I was with the Department of Justice. Uh, we were involved in looking at a case involving the shooting up at Marysville High School, Marysville Pilchuck, where this young man got a hold of a gun, a pistol in his home, owned by a family member, I think a grandparent, took that pistol to school and killed himself and I think 3 or 4 other people. I mean, again, access, again, the availability of it. And I think it's got to be the issue of identifying individuals who need counseling, consultation, etc., and also the availability. If we identify individuals who need help and we don't give them help, and then we also have avenues where they can get a hold of a firearm, you're going to have it's going to be the perfect storm.
yeah,
Sandy Hook, that mother bought that young man his semi-automatic weapon.
yeah.
It's just, again, and again, I don't think there's any simple answer to this,
Mhm.
and so that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, thank you for engaging on that a little bit. I mean, I don't think any of us have answers, and I think all of us are afraid for our children and our families
Hmm.
and your children, right? We're afraid for
Yeah.
them. I do want to talk. I mean, I wanted you to come on because you are heavily involved in a lot of issues here in the Seattle area. Maybe start off by giving us a kind of a broad brush of all the things that you're involved in before we dive into a few things.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I mean, I'm not trying to, I'm not running for office. I'm not trying to uh, uh, be a soothsayer and all of that kind of stuff. But no, I've been involved in a number of organizations. One of the ones that we actually first started in was it used to be the ML King Celebration Committee, and that was way back in 1983. I think it was about 17 of us, and we met and we planned the march, etc. And it's gravitated to be a major event here on ML King Day, statewide. And we found out that the organization was one of the oldest west of the Mississippi. Actually, we are the oldest, and I'm part of that committee, and it's called the Celebration Committee. We also have. Uh, I've also been involved with WINA, which is just recently on the board of Washington Equity Now Alliance. And that's our spokesperson is Jesse Weinberg, who's actually very fundamental in organizing it. And, so that is dealing with issues involving equity, bringing back recently the governor. This is the first year anniversary of his signing of the Executive Order 2202, bringing back affirmative action in state government. You remember I-200 back in 1998 did away with all of that. Well, it's a different circumstance. So we're looking at that as a vehicle to bring about equity.
So let me interrupt you. So I remember reading about Governor Inslee signing that. And just to recap that for our audience who doesn't know, initiative, let's see, back in, was it 1995, before I-1000, it was Initiative 200.
I-200, right.
I-200. And so that passed with, it was the Tim Eyman era where that
John
took
Carlson,
away,
right.
John Carlson, right? Yeah. And that took away, I guess the misconceptions about affirmative action is that people believe that was giving access to unqualified brown and black people into jobs. And so at the time, and I have a little bit of knowledge about the data because when I ran for office, I remember researching it, and roughly, so I ran in 2018, and when I looked at the numbers from 1995, at that time, the numbers were like 14% of brown and black people that were getting access to education, that were getting access to government contracting, the way to build wealth. When I ran 5 years ago, that number had dropped from 14% to 1 point something percent. And so the false narrative that has been perpetuated here in white communities is that, brown and black people are getting in unqualified preference. Right. And so, but that is not the case. And so affirmative action really is affirming whiteness. It is affirming white people are getting into all the access and opportunity. And so Initiative 1000 came out.
Right.
And I know Jesse Weinberry, local activist here in the Seattle area, spearheaded that. And then I know many of us knocked a lot of doors, and it fell short of the vote,
really small margin.
But now the governor signed a veto or something to override that. And so what does that mean now?
Well, he's requiring all state agencies to abide by the Executive Order 2202. What is also is overlaying this, though, is we're watching the Supreme Court, and we know that in June they're going to be probably giving out their decision regarding the Harvard case, and I think it's North Carolina. These are cases involving affirmative action in student enrollment. And I think it's important that you pointed out. In 1998, when the I-200 was fully implemented, between 1998 and up until like a year, up till now, 98% of all public dollars for contracting and services went to non-minority firms. 98%. of your dollars, my dollars, public dollars, tax dollars went to non-minority firms. That if that doesn't say we need to do something to remedy that, I don't know what else. Do I have to hit you over the head with it? No, and it's obvious.
And
so,
the statistics show.
yeah,
So from even while brown and black people don't have the access, the highest demographic, two data points I'm going to reference tonight. The highest rate of advanced education in the United States right now is occurring by Black women. So Black women are still getting ourselves with letters behind our names to advance ourselves. So we are still, without having the preference to get in, we're still higher educated. And I believe that scares people,
yeah,
number one. And number two, the monies that are the public monies, our tax dollars, are going to all of these white owned firms. And even though, I mean, this is my opinion, even though the state has measurements in place to help give public dollars to women and minority owned businesses, that money is not reaching us the way
yeah,
that it's reaching white businesses. And the contracting dollars, so people are building all this wealth off of our tax dollars, it's going to predominantly white male businesses. And this is it's a significant issue for our communities because of our ability to build generational wealth and to be able to provide for our families. And so now we have an intervention, I guess is the word, for the governor signing
yeah.
this, overriding it. And so now we start from basically 1%. And now, I don't know what the next steps are. I think we're all kind of trying to pay attention to equity is not about equality. To turn brown and black lives around, prosperity for our families requires a significant influx of money. It's why we are starting. It's why we're talking about reparations.
Right.
That's being talked about on the national level. You can't undo this much injustice by giving $100,000 to some family and thinking that that's going to satisfy that family and call it good. And so is you belong to Democrats for Diversity and Inclusion. Is there more activism work going to be able to hold?
Yeah, we're hoping WINA and all the other organizations that are part of the affiliation, the Washington Equity Now Alliance, I said alliance, we're hoping to get it codified, which means making it into law, because the executive order only lasts until the governor's term, and then it could be changed. Mm-hmm. And again, think of it. Take a dollar bill and take 98 cents of it out, and that's what's left for us. Mm-hmm. A dollar bill, take 98 cents, actually 98 point something percent out. Mm-hmm. That's why you get almost that 1%. It was really, as they say, rounded up. Mm-hmm. Because that is significant, and that shows that there is a disparity. That shows that needs to be remediated. And anyways, this whole issue of preference is not. Again, it's a hollow argument, because nobody would believe that regardless of your race, creed, color, national origin, age, sex, marital status, or presence of any physical, sensory, mental disability, sexual orientation, or political ideology, that if you're not qualified for the job, that you should get it. No.
But now we are more than qualified,
yes.
Right? And so now begs the question, because that has happened, because that transition, the oppression, and so the community, us, we rise to that.
Responded,
and so,
yes.
Right, exactly. We responded.
Right.
And so now the question becomes, can we displace these folks? Because now the term that's going around in the business world, at least in the nonprofit world, is now they're using the term shared power, mm-hmm. because they don't want to give up the power. So now they're trying to inch into it. And my sarcasm says, it's 2023. And so they're trying to still hold on to it for another 50 years before a brown or black person actually has the power. But we are now at a place where, education-wise, our communities have been rising up and above and beyond. And the other statistic I was going to quote is I was recently listening to an economic forecast here on the East Side, and they quoted the statistic of post-COVID, 44% of new businesses that stood up are owned by Black women. And so here we are now, we've got another ecosystem, another economic engine that is here, that money is not reaching these businesses. And
Right.
so it's like a perfect storm, because we're now at that point where we are going to have to say no to generations of people that have been historically told yes, and who have had access and the privilege of having it all.
Well, that's exactly it. And that's exactly what the underpinnings when you talk about this whole brouhaha about critical race theory. Well, when you start dismantling the fact that white supremacy is really what you're talking about, the ability to make laws and to form and create institutions to oppress a group, that's what it's about. And that's why they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say anything about that, because again, this country has a real hard time talking about race because of slavery, because of genocide, and because of how immigrants are treated. Slavery against persons of African descent, genocide against the Native. We had a policy to kill as many Indians as we could. And then how we treat immigrants. And so, those are the three things that we cannot talk about. That's what I'm saying when we talk about race. And it can't be done. And then on top of that, demographics are scaring a lot of people, because fairly soon, in at least I may still be kicking, I don't know, but in about 25 to 30 years, the population shift is going to be predicated on the fact that, at least what the experts are saying, the majority of the people in this country were not going to be white. They're going to be biracial or multiracial, which means
it's not that far off, because there's a book. It's called Brown is the New White.
Right.
It's by the author, I think his name is Stephen Phillips. And I want to say the year he projects political power changes is 2035.
That's what I heard.
Right. So we're 10 years away, 12 years away from, and that is why, that's the big reason why there's been such an influx of targeting of shutting down or trying to shut down brown and Black people, access to education, all the things that help us prosper. Let's take a quick break, and then we're going to pick this right back up. John, hold on just a second.
Thank you.
COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in. They talked to our lender and saved our home. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home. Federal funding details at washingtonhaf.org.
What up, y'all? T-Dub here, as always, bringing you the news and art funding and opportunities. This year's For Culture Project grants are live now, and here's what you need to know to apply. For Culture Project grants fund cultural activities and projects throughout King County. If you are an individual or group with arts, heritage, or preservation at its core, then this funding is for you. And if you're new to the grant application process, For Culture hosts virtual workshops and has a team of grant managers ready to assist you in the process. The deadline to apply is March 23rd. Head over to forculture.org for more.
Welcome back to Heartbeat. I am your host, Cindy Bright, with my guest this evening, John Yasutake sitting here with me. He is the host of Seattle Here and Now, and he's also the host of What's Cooking in Columbia City. So I'm going to turn to him. We were just having a discussion about, a lot of the political issues, the affirmative action, some of the issues around equity here in the state of Washington. And we're in a progressive state, and I'll say that with quotation marks. And we are still running against a 1% of people having access. John, do you have any view? Do you follow politics as closely as I follow it? And are you following what's going on in the legislature right now?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to respond to, because you can't help but be impacted by politics. Everything is political. Socioeconomic is based on politics. In other words, if you have the ability to pass laws and create situations, again, those institutions, that is involving politics. When people say, I don't want to, hold it. It begins by the simple fact that you get registered and vote. You can impact the system that way, and it can happen. However, there's a whole lot of gray area out there, because especially, let's talk about the issue reparations. That is a national issue, because what is at stake to me, and this is my interpretation, how do you rectify and remedy and remediate and repay someone for hundreds of years of their labor, blood, sweat, and toil, and their lives? How can you put a dollar figure on that? But every major city in this country that was born out of slavery was built by slaves. By that I mean, when you talk about the cities of the South where slavery was there, and let me say this: don't ever bite off on that belief that the South was, they were fighting for this higher belief in states' rights. They were fighting to preserve the way they live, because the way they lived was predicated on slavery.
What do you think we should do about reparations?
Well, it's like this. Understand the whole premise behind what slavery meant. Slavery was based upon the belief of racial superiority, white superiority, and that it was okay to go to Africa and bring people in because they were dark-skinned. And the church said, those that are lighter color, those white is purity, black is evil. That's some of the teaching. And the church granted, the Roman Catholic Church granted the asiento, which meant you could engage in the slave trade from Africa to Spanish colony or Spanish possessions. That wasn't written off the books in the Vatican until 1965. And so, again, all of these things just added up. All the things that have happened, all the harmful, hurtful things, the destroying of Rosewood, the Black Wall Street, all of these things, the lynchings, all of this stuff. And it was based upon the belief of white superiority. And it was based upon the fact that they had the right to conscript somebody, take them from their homeland, put them in a place, make them work and build and give their life and their blood. And the thing about it is, the worst variant of slavery is bad, no matter how you cut it. But the worst was the North American variant, which was practiced here. Because if you were a child of a slave, you were a slave. Your children's 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 children would be slaves. And and when they stopped the slave trade, they created breeding farms in this country.
So what do you think here in Washington State? Let's bring it down another level.
Yeah,
like when because like in San Francisco,
Yeah.
so there is a lot of controversy there. But what San Francisco has done is proposed a $5 million per Black citizen fee to be paid back. And of course, that creates all kinds of, you can just imagine, because even very basic things like trying to from the federal government trying to relieve student debt because it will disproportionately help Black families. It's created this huge backlash and judgment of things that people who have access and daddies don't have an understanding of. But here, if we talk practically about what we should do here in Washington State, should we be thinking about a dollar figure attached to Black residents here?
Well, I've heard two discussions. One was, yes, give us money, but the other one was give us property. Because to me, the simplest way to wealth is owning property. To me, at least that's what I was taught. I think it's a practice that most people of color understand, that owning property is important, and it's a way.
So where could the state of Washington give us property here? Let's just break that down, because the elected people are watching this show. So if we're talking to our legislators, what do we want to say to them? What if they give us property? What property should we get?
Well, no, I hope I don't. You're probably going to get some response, but you got millions of acres of federal land out there, parks, places like that. That are undeveloped and they're pristine. And I'm a nature lover too, just like you are. And I'm not a tree hugger, but I believe in nature and the environment and all that. But you've got land out there. I mean,
and should we be budgeting? I don't mean to interrupt your thought.
No.
I mean, should we be budgeting? In our legislative sessions? That's why I was asking. Are you following what's going on? Should we be budgeting X percent of our budgets every year now to hold back? So it's kind of like what corporate America does to give white executive leadership teams hold back X percent of budget so that we can give them bonuses
at the end of the year.
So why don't we start thinking about holding back X percent of our operating budget here in the state of Washington and designating some sort of stipend or something per year? I mean, these are just ways that
10 cents of every tax dollar can go towards that fund. The thing is, but think of it though, and I got to get this in there. In 1864-5, William Tecumseh Sherman was in the historic March to the Sea. He targeted Atlanta as the place he was going to end up. And he said, we're going to do this. We're going to destroy that city because we're going to teach these rebels a lesson that they supported slavery and they rebelled against the United States. Then he came up with this thing called Field Order 15, which includes North Carolina, parts of South Carolina, and Florida. And he said, we are going to recapture all this land and free the slaves and give them that property. And that's where we get that term 40 acres. The mule was brought in because Sherman said, hold it, we need to talk to the people that are affected. So he brought a number of Black clergymen in to talk about it and ask them, how do you want to be, how do you want to do this? I mean, you have the ability for self-determination here. Tell us what you want to do. I mean, he let them say, and he says 40, literally that's where they believe that term 40 acres and a mule came from, because you needed the land and you need to work the land and you need to be able to work the land. And that's why he had a mule and everything. But that was signed by Lincoln. Lincoln then got assassinated. It was rescinded by Andrew Johnson. And so, I could not believe what I was reading when I read that. Field Order 15. And anybody listening or watching, go online and look at that, and you will understand how fascinating that is. And that was one of the things, like I said, we wouldn't even be talking about reparations if that had happened.
There's another interesting thing going on in the legislature right now. So I hope our audience is paying attention to, if you guys don't follow the bills, and certainly after legislative session, which ends April the 23rd, we'll be doing a lot more updates on this show about what has transpired during the session. There is an interesting issue that the Democrats are trying to push right now, which is around the wealth tax.
Right.
And so in the state of Washington, everybody knows, because most people are carrying the burden of taxes here, while the whatever percent, and I want to say, don't quote me on this number, but there are like 8 or 9 very wealthy people that the state has been trying to get to be able to pay taxes on, and that money from those 8 or 9 people would address many of these issues around funding education, around our housing crisis that we have here, and could also go for helping repair communities of color, reparations, and things that could help change lives of people.
Yeah.
And it's worth billions of dollars. But I quickly glanced at it before I came on air, and it sounds like it's tripping up, which we
Stalled up,
expect.
yeah,
It's tripping
yeah,
up, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
on the I know it's there, and I know that the Washington Democrats have been pushing to try to get that tax thing, that tax bill passed.
Well, the simplification is that Democrats are for taxing and quote supporting social programs and that kind of stuff, and the Republicans are noted for saying, don't tax us, we're the rich, we don't need to be taxed, we can use our money to help absolve some of these things, which they don't.
And these aren't social programs.
Well,
social
yeah.
programs are when we bail banks out,
Thank you.
right? Social
I
program,
know.
right? Social
I mean,
programs
see,
are when
it's again so contradictory, and basically, again, Republicans are noted for not wanting to be taxed. Because they don't believe, well, I don't get into that. That's a simplistic statement, but we know that they're resisting. So we'll just leave it at that. And so, what we're talking about is what's due. We have to find a way to repay the people who built this country. And, it's another issue that's come up time and time again. How do you repay somebody for all of that they've done? I mean, I love that shirt that we built this country for free, and that's a fact. Our national capital was built by slaves.
Still, one could make an argument we're still working for free. I mean, don't even get me going on. We've talked on this show many times about what's happening to Black women in organizations, right? Wage disparities,
right.
Last week or the week before, we had Aparna Ray on with us who talked. She's a metrics person. We see where all the numbers were 95% of DEI work is going to white women businesses. So the pattern and the problem is still being perpetuated, and it is being used now as the scapegoat for why the Silicon Valley Bank failed. It's because they were focused on DEI. All white bank, all white leadership saying that they were distracted because of this. So they keep perpetuating these narratives that they don't want to focus on paying us. And so why don't we stop kidding ourselves, right? They are not going to pay us. They are not going to equalize pay equity and that, right? So we have to reparations are definitely going to have to come into play, because even for us to have our own businesses, and then we're still fighting to get capital into our businesses, we're going to have to repay that. You can't keep leaving this divide so huge, and then legislative session after legislative session after legislative session, we still can't get some of these things passed. And so,
well, yeah, and that is an issue, and it has been. Let's talk about the history of that kind of stuff. Well, look at the Small Business Administration. They basically were the creation to help small businesses, to help that kind of thing. But I mean, I know of instances where, because of the industry practice of, I know these 5 African-American men, all professional men, all with significant years of experience and the acumen to run a business, as well as having the wealth to do it. The monetary savings that they had, all of these things, and access to it. The 5 of them were rejected by one of the biggest banks here, one of the national banks, and it just basically just told me that no matter how good you look on paper and you may not just be looking good on paper, it's substantive, it is real. You have to go through that assessment of your race, your gender, all of those things. And that's still how it's done, you know?
Well, and so again, yes, that whole system, I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't know this. We have Representative Jamila Taylor's coming on the last Wednesday of the month to give us a debrief. She's been doing some really great work in the legislature, but there are a myriad of issues that have to be tackled. So if you think about the lending, you talked about the Small Business Administration and what it takes to get a loan, and how credit scores are significant. And brown and black communities are expected to have 800 credit scores while they're making 53 cents to the dollar. And I just saw a study come out this last week about it takes $40 to $60 an hour to be able to afford rent in this city. Wow. So the numbers don't make sense. And we can't get, if you're keeping oppressing races of people to not give them that earning power, they can't housing, huge issue, right? Can't get into housing with $15 an hour. And so again, we continue to talk about these kind of topics every week. And, I like to hear ideas of what people have and what they think about it. Also trying to understand what some of these different organizations are that we're all involved in. You're involved in them. What are they doing to help us to advance solutions for some of these issues?
Well, yeah, I mean, just drill down, the economic piece, the social piece. I mean, one of the things that is creating a lot of concern is the rise of hate crimes, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, because we're talking about significant increases. Still, the number one group being attacked based on race, African Americans. Secondly, Asians. Then in Native American, and then other groups, LGBTQ. But still, at the top of the list is hate crime acts against African Americans, as well as persons who are black, and then Asians. I think that's 3,000% increase in crimes against Asians. It was about 7% of all the criminal crimes. And I had a chance to look at the supplemental report from the FBI, and what they did was they adjusted it based on information being reported. So that's the other thing. The FBI can only report on hate crimes that they've been given from other law enforcement jurisdictions. And I'm going to be very honest with you. If you're in backwater Mississippi and you're a white sheriff, I doubt very seriously if you're going to even talk about a hate crime there. I mean, I'm making fun and all that, but it is a fact. There are pockets in this country where they don't believe there's such a thing as a hate crime, especially against people of color, beginning with African Americans. And so who is the largest minority population in those places? African Americans, especially in the South. And so, here we go. 10,000, 12,000, 10,000 incidents with 12,000 victims. We're talking about an increase of 11.6% in 2021 to 2022. And they did say that they've gotten reports from 14,859 law enforcement agencies, which is good. And that represents they're reporting about 91.1% of the US population. In other words, there's a good majority of these law enforcement agencies that are reporting these incidents across the country at reflecting 91% of the population. And that's good. The problem is it would be great if it could be 100%, because I'm guaranteeing you there are pockets in this country where you have large populations of African Americans who are being attacked and victims of hate crime that's not going to get reported. That's my suspicion. Okay.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think an important thing to talk about for a moment is that we're in a presidential election year. And so with the increase of hate crimes, and there is going to be, we're foolish to not believe that there is going to be increased targeting to brown and black people,
Right.
even to black media people, those of us who are speaking and talking about what's going on. It would not surprise me, right? Like, we all have to be particularly careful because um, I believe we're all targeted.
Yep.
And Washington is considered progressive compared to the rest of the country, and so I could see that this could be an area that would be there would be a lot of effort to infiltrate on social media, to infiltrate messaging, and to try to harm people. So have you heard, or is anybody else talking about that topic?
Well, Washington State happens to sit between two other states where there's been a significant rise in hate group activity and hate group organization. Idaho is one state. We know that. Oregon is the other. I recall a few years ago that I ran across this group, all white, young white men, and I was looking at their activities and all the things that they were doing in Portland, and the name got dropped on me. Hey, we're the Proud Boys. And when you talk in terms of things that have occurred across this country, DC, a significant number of those participants in that, quote, insurrection were members of Proud Boys. Attacks in Portland, Proud Boys. I mean, like I said, it's obvious. There are acts of hate that occur by individuals. Okay, but what is disturbing and what is more frightening is the organization attack. In other words, a well-planned, organized effort. A few years ago, they found I think it was a duffel bag under a park bench in Spokane along the march route for ML King celebration, and it had a bomb in it. And see, these are the kinds of things that are occurring in this country. People need to take, at least the effort to, we're trying to, with a coalition of different groups, bolster the hate crime bill in this state. The Shepard-Byrd Act was signed by President Obama in 2009, which included gender, sexual orientation. But we really want, at the state level, we would really like to, I'm part of another organization. One of the organizations is part of the Jewish American Federation statewide. I was referred there by the Anti-Defamation League, a friend of mine, and is a representative of OCA because Asian crimes, hate crimes, crimes against persons of Jewish faith, the anti-Semitic crimes is 300% increase. And again, at the top, still very high on the list in the percentage of hate crimes, African Americans. So we all have an interest in this, and we're working all to hopefully, not this session, but at some point in time, address the fact that we need to have more teeth in these anti-hate crime bill. Hate crime bills, and punish these people. I mean, it's an issue. So, man, but thanks for letting me have the floor on that. So.
No, it's an important topic, extremely important topic. Again, because of the season that we're in now, and because we have continued to watch. I mean, we're seeing an increase. When you look across the country and you look at Attorney Ben Crump and you look at Civil Rights Attorney Lee Merritt,
Right.
You look at Chris Stewart, like these Black lawyers across the country are fighting and representing.
Yeah.
I don't know how Attorney Crump does it. He's got like a new client every day on social media that he's trying to represent because of murders and hate crimes and the things that families. And I just think it's important that we here in Washington State are not immune to this. And so it's an important thing for us to be paying attention to. And it's an important thing to know that our social media and conversations that we're having with each other probably need to be scaled back because they're being monitored and bots are coming in, and hate stuff is going to start or is going to increase. So
let's look at it in an everyday circumstance. yeah, we need the legislation. We need law enforcement to be involved. Forgetting defunding the police. We need them to be active in terms of dealing with these criminals out there that would, use race as an issue. But, we're talking about how it affects all of us. We have disparities in the health system that I'm listening to this report, NPR. If you are an African-American woman and you have a health issue such as cancer, such as you're probably going to be the one that's least likely to be moved up on the list for diagnostic and treatment. In other words, you're at the bottom of the list. And the disparities that are coming out are showing that you'll be, the last to be diagnosed, and you'll be the last to get a regimen and treatment. It is a fact. And these are white doctors that are saying this. You are an older Black woman and you're ill. You are running the risk. It's like a gauntlet. You may get help. You may not get help.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on
I know,
healthcare. Yeah.
But I know it's unbelievable what I'm hearing. And then when you think about what happened during the pandemic, it just exacerbated it and brought into the open the disparities in health based on race.
Yep.
So, I just had to say that because I was shocked. I was shocked when I heard this. And this was a great NPR report. And so like I said, I'm going to be doing more follow-up. And it boils down to who's getting treated, who's getting served, but who's getting trained and educated to become doctors to serve our community and people of color. And how are they treated in the system?
It's a whole show, John. It's a whole show. It's a whole show.
I'm sorry I opened that door, but
there's so much in that. Remember, I could talk myself about health, right? I have been through my own battles, and my friends and my co-hosts and everybody. We've all had to experience a lot of challenges.
More power to you. More power to you.
Yes. Well, John, look, fastest hour of the day is when I'm on air.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want to thank you for coming on this evening and talking with me and talking with our community about what's happening here, the work that you're doing, the organizations that you're involved in. I think it's important for our community that we continue to have these kind of conversations and to talk about what's going on. I emphasize and encourage us to look out for each other, pay attention to our surroundings. Let's help fight this for justice and equity for all people. I just think we'll be a better society as a result of it. So thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Next week, we have another great show. We are going to be doing a show on Black-led charter schools. And I think it's timely to talk about the options that Black families are choosing in order to get their children educated and to get them out of a system that is not educating them. So we're going to break that down next week. Thank you for joining us all this evening. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Half that up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.